Last night, Donald Trump sealed his fate. By signing the release of the Epstein files, Donald Trump did something he has never done in his entire political career, and that is admit defeat. Admit defeat to Thomas Massie, to Marjorie Taylor Greene, to Ro Khanna, to all of the public pressure to release the Epstein files. Now, that doesn't mean that Donald Trump and Pam Bondi will happily go along with transparency, but it does mean they will be held accountable, not just by what is released from those files, but what comes out that is not in the files. And that is why Donald Trump is panicking most, because a former fired advisor continues to screw Donald Trump as new leaks show new evidence and have this White House in shambles. We are going to get into it all, but before we do, if I could quickly ask you to leave a like on this video, and if you haven't already and you enjoy our channel, to hit that subscribe button because it goes a long way in supporting our work. Now, before we get into MSNBC's reporting on that fired advisor who is screwing Trump, I want to start with someone else who is sharing information outside the purview of the Epstein files, but is maybe more damaging than anything we've seen so far, and that's Jeffrey Epstein's brother, who detailed this phone call.
Trump was a crook. That's a direct quote from Jeffrey. He stopped hanging out with Trump when he realized Trump was a crook.
So that leads me then to the second question, which is that I know you've said your brother told you that he and Trump spoke in 2016 when Trump won the presidency, even though just 3 years later, Trump said this.
I haven't spoken to him in probably 15 years or more. I wasn't a big fan of Jeffrey Epstein, that I can tell you.
Young women.
No, I had no idea. I had no idea. I haven't spoken to him in many, many years.
So he said, I haven't spoken to him in many, many years, Mark. And then he said in the same year, I haven't spoken to him in probably 15 years or more. That was in 2019. But you say your brother talked to you about a conversation he had very close to this time in 2016 with Trump?
Yeah, after the election, I used to speak to Jeffrey regularly, and one of the calls we spoke, Jeffrey told me that Trump, it was after the election that Trump called him, and it was sort of like, can you believe this? Because nobody believed Trump was going to win. Trump was sort of surprised himself that he won. So Jeffrey said he called him like, could you believe this type of a phone call?
So Trump called your brother?
Yes, that's what Jeffrey told me, yes.
You and I have spoken before, and at the time, you were telling me why you don't accept the
What the continued Trump-Epstein connection shows to me is the dismissal of the central lie that Donald Trump has told this entire time. The first being that he never had a friendship with Jeffrey Epstein, which we simply know to be untrue. The second, that Donald Trump is flip-flopping on whether he wanted to be aware of the fact that Jeffrey Epstein was a sex criminal or not. Of course, we saw him say in the Oval Office the other day that he thought he was a creep, and thus he kicked him out of Mar-a-Lago. An admission that Donald Trump knew what was happening, said nothing, and did nothing, obviously. Sure, he wanted to protect from his employees being taken away, but that's it. Donald Trump just cared about the business. He didn't care about what Jeffrey Epstein was doing. That much is true. So this call is revealing that not only did Trump continue that relationship with Epstein, but he clearly continued to worry about what Epstein might say. And that is going to be further revealed in this reporting that we're going to get into. But I think it's incredibly important that we start with what Epstein's brother, again, had to say about Steve Bannon.
All right, I have a couple questions for you about this, Mark. But first this. You say that your brother told you something very different about their falling out than what Trump says?
Well, it's not that he told me. Steve Bannon was doing interviews with Jeffrey and taping them, and Jeffrey had sent me a Dropbox link to one of those interview sessions. And on that tape, Jeffrey clearly stated that he stopped hanging out with Trump when he realized Trump was a crook. That's a direct quote from Jeffrey. He stopped hanging out with Trump when he realized Trump was a crook.
This connection between Bannon and Epstein is so important, both as these guys kind of navigated the beginning of MAGA world themselves. But as Bannon was kind of an outcast from this White House, trying to rehabilitate himself, he went off and tried to pitch himself as like this global populist figure with the War Room show that he does. But at the same time, he was also clearly trying to help out the Trump administration and ingratiate himself back with Trump. And it's the reason, likely, he spent so much time with Epstein. Now, Epstein spent a lot of time with Bannon, it seems, trying to make Trump worried, which he obviously was. But to me, this indicates the cover-up that was already happening in the first administration and is clearly outlined by the reporting that Ari Melber does on more leaks between Bannon and Epstein that expose and implicate Trump, as Ari Melber says right here.
Some other emails I'm about to read to you implicate Trump and have a gossipy, almost sort of cartoonishly sinister tone, except that we know how much serious bad stuff was going down. Epstein was in on all kinds of references. He talked about Trump figures that Bannon might see, referring to billionaire Trump supporter Peter Thiel being in town. Bannon should take no heat, me, not worth it for the moment, he advised. And in an email to journalist Michael Wolff, Epstein talks about seeing Bannon in London, saying he seemed paranoid about any reporters seeing me with him. My guess is he's working hard on his relationship with Trump, who he sees as newly ascendant, and being seen with me may, and it's hard to get the exact implication here, but seem would affect that. And then he writes Bannon's media tour seemed with an eye toward an audience of one. He talks about Bannon's right-wing meetings in France and says, these guys seemed like idiots. He goes on to say, Bannon, surrounded by his own thuggish-looking security people and wacky blogger advisors, thrives precisely because the world of populism is so unprofessional, if not farcical. There's an email that has not actually gotten much attention, and understandably, like I said, there's 20,000 of these. But look at what happens. You're kind of going inside in real time when Epstein learns that all of his fancy talk media outreach to Wolff was, on a key issue for him, a failure, and maybe hurt Bannon too. He writes to Bannon, quote, I've now seen some of Wolff's book. Mentions me and underage prostitutes. Let me repeat that. That's the thing they were working to quiet down, minimize, or lie about. Quote, mentions me, Epstein writes, and underage prostitutes. You, as the man behind and in front of the curtain, lots of Steve quotes, lots. Bannon appears to see the problem, replying, ugh, anything awful? Wish he hadn't done that. Why are you mentioned at all? You rarely get this kind of view. There's no public bluster or spin here. We just see two self-styled strategists admitting their whole media outreach strategy failed. This was Epstein's main vulnerability, underage sex crimes, boosted to new visibility in a book that spent about 2 months atop the bestseller list in a period of Trump mania in America. There were many people in politics and beyond who were reading about Epstein for the first time in that context because of the book. Epstein then replied to Bannon's question, noting Wolff wrote about the Palm Beach house purchase and how Epstein and Trump may have had a fight about that, saying, don't reach out to Michael. Well, if he meant Michael Wolff, it's a little late for that. The book is out. Epstein also detailed money laundering allegations against Trump to Wolff, who, that's the author now, says Epstein has also worried that his whole original Florida probe, where he ultimately got a sweetheart deal but was the first legal problem that set in motion these events, Wolff says Epstein seemed to have the fear, paranoia, or belief that it came from Donald Trump reporting him to the cops as payback, dropping a dime. To be clear, that's a theory that could explain Epstein's anger at Trump. If that's his belief, Donald Trump's guy, Steve Bannon, to talk about Trump. And he wrote, quote, now you can understand why Trump wakes up in the middle of the night sweating when he hears you and I are friends. It's quite a claim.
To me, what Ari Melber reports is the reason why not only is now the most important time to be talking about Epstein, it is more important to be talking about Epstein now than ever before. But I also think that it reframes what we should be talking about when we're talking about the cover-up. Sure, what Kash Patel and Pam Bondi and Dan Bongino and Todd Blanche have done over the past couple of months to obstruct the release of these documents is a cover-up. And if they have done anything to taint them, to remove Donald Trump's name, to help him in any way, there will be criminal prosecution. But that is just one part of the cover-up. The cover-up I'm much more interested in is the let's get rid of this guy. Let's shut him up. Let's take care of him cover-up that was clearly being engaged with during the first Trump administration, whether that be bringing in Epstein's old lawyers, of course, Alex Acosta, who gave him the sweetheart deal, but don't forget about Alan Dershowitz, Epstein's lawyer working for Donald Trump. He brought in figures who were close to Epstein, not just close to Epstein, like they had personal connections and they were, chatting back and forth to make sure he kept quiet, but personal connections and the way that they would be happy themselves to see Epstein go away. There are so many Republicans who we've seen have their names detailed as those receiving funds from Epstein. And you're telling me those people wouldn't be happy for him to just go away, to not have to worry about the Epstein issue anymore? No, that is clearly the case. And of course, Donald Trump is going to try to pretend that this was all only Democrats involved with Epstein. It was only Democrats. It was only Bill Clinton and Larry Summers, and that was it. No one else, and stop looking. And he literally said, stop looking, stop talking about me. But it's not going to work. What these leaks from Bannon show is, again, how long Donald Trump has been trying to cover up the Epstein files. And that text from Epstein. Donald Trump wakes up sweating at night, wakes up in a panic. Why? Because of their friendship. And what might their friendship mean? One thing that is clear to me, though, that Ari Melber details is that these guys both thought that they were playing each other. So clearly Epstein might have been trying to get back at Trump or intimidate Trump, and Bannon was trying to get Trump to like him again. But either way, the cover-up is clear, the relationship is clear. There will be no rewriting of history. And Jessica Tarlov put that so perfectly right here.
But this idea that the Epstein files is going to be reframed as a Democratic hoax is never going to work. The American public is not cool with it. What does he have? Trump has a minus 39 approval on handling the Epstein files, and only 45% of Republicans even approve at this point. The narrative about Hakeem Jeffries, everyone at this table knows how fundraising emails work. So that email was from someone named Lisa Rossi, who's from a random fundraising group called Dynamic SRG, asking if Epstein wants to go to a generic DCCC dinner that Obama and Jeffries were going to be at. There was never any meeting. There was never any donation. And he appears one time in the Epstein files.
Over the next couple of days, weeks, months, really years, I know that Republicans are going to try to rewrite this. They're going to say it was only Democrats connected to Epstein. That's going to be the first line, just as a mode of distraction. But the farther we get away from the 50 days that Adelita Grijalva spent as a representative-elect instead of being sworn in, the farther we get away from Trump screaming and bleeding into the night that we should all just move on from Epstein and why are you talking about him, all the work that was done by all the Republicans to block any release of these files, they will be claiming that they went with it all along. Well, I voted for the release. Yeah, but why didn't you sign the discharge petition? Why? Well, I voted for the release, but why were you stopping it before? We cannot allow them to rewrite their history. We are going to call them out on this show. If you want to support that, as always, you can hit that subscribe button, leave a like on this video. If you stuck around to the end, drop a blue heart in the comments. Keep on fighting, y'all. Don't let them silence you. And until next time, I'll see you soon.